Market growth breeds commercialization activity. This was an idiom I created many years ago to describe the reactive nature of the functional CPG industry. And it would certainly describe what has played out within the hydration and energy categories over the last 5 to 7 years. These functional CPG segments have both seen an explosion in market growth that drove rapid experimentation and development within an ever expanding number of usage occasions. Additionally, consider that both the hydration and energy categories sit squarely within my defined triad of CPG of having strong gross margins, high frequency of use, and passionate brand communities. So it's hard not to be enthralled by everything, which might be partly why Market Insights Director at Spin, Scott Dicker, and I regularly feature them in our quarterly functional CPG categorical deep dives. Beyond providing some recent categorical retail sales data snippets, we describe several driving forces impacting comparable results, including the growing beverage identity crisis that stems from consumers more regularly swapping between ready to mix and ready to drink form factors. But don't worry, that's not the only time we reference how the supplement industry is altering the strategic plans at large incumbent beverage brands. In fact, Scott and I cover some of those trending hydration and energy category storylines that are hidden below the big two market share leaders. Additionally, we explain why these incubated within the supplement industry brands can scale faster than any other time in business history. But before we jump into those insightful categorical topics and many more, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the supporter of this content, Cognizant. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, plus, y'all see the branded beverage cooler over my shoulder in YouTube videos. But whether it's in a traditional supplement format or included in a convenient energy drink, like you'll notice I'm drinking throughout the episode, the brain energy ingredient Cognizant is a part of my everyday routine to stay at peak performance levels. To learn more, I'll leave the link to the Cognizant website in this content's description. But without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good friend and fellow functional CPG data nerd, Scott Dicker. Well, I wasted my good introduction. If you guys were, a fly on the wall for Scott and I's conversation before we hit record, it would have been perfect. But I hope everybody is well hydrated and full of energy, because if you didn't pick up on that kind of poor attempt as a second kind of punny introduction, Scott and I are going to be tackling a collection of different like hydration and energy CPG categorical themes and kind of driving forces within this episode. But I don't want to waste too much time here. But so Scott, appreciate you giving me time as always. Welcome back. This is becoming one of my favorite kind of things we do every quarter.
It's great to be here. And, I was just noticing I'm usually doing these podcasts from the Spin's headquarters here in Chicago. And I think I've been in a different conference room every time. So it might look like I'm in different places, but I'm usually in the Spin's office, just happen to be in whatever office is open at the time. And so I'm ready to roll. This is a category that we both love. And isn't it nice when categories that we love are the ones driving a lot of the innovation and sales and trending up? It's just, it makes it so much more fun to talk about. And let's dive in.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of give you the floor at first, because I unfortunately did not get to go to Expo West. I had a newborn that crashed the party, so I was not able to go. So you had the ability, I'm assuming, to be able to kind of check things out. So from your perspective, like what caught your eye in terms of these categories? Was there anything, it could be trends, it could be, brands or products, or anything that like kind of stuck out to you while you were walking around?
So it was a great show, but first of all, big congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Super exciting. I'm sure I'm about to complain about how busy I was at Expo and how little I slept. So I know that pales in comparison to having a newborn in the house. So maybe I'll skip that part.
Yeah.
And we'll just go with, the show was really incredible. There was like just overall the energy at the show was really palpable, where people seem to be really in a good mood, in a good position. I think not that things are all perfect, but I think things feel a little more normal than they have in the past couple of years. And I think that that alone let people really focus on some of the fundamentals and their normal execution strategies at the show. And then functional beverage in general was really big at the show again, and specifically, hydration is seeing kind of the innovation that I think we saw with energy drinks like 3, 4, 5 years ago, where there's just like a lot of new players entering the market. There's a lot of, it's a trending health focus both in supplements and in beverages. And we're also seeing that like plus in hydration drinks for really mostly the first time. Like there's been a few here and there, but you're seeing, added adaptogens in it, added immune health benefits in it, and just the sheer number of brands that are making hydration beverages was on full display. On the energy drink side, I think that I don't want to say critical mass of energy because we know that a lot of people are still entering the market, but there has been it's not like it was in the past couple of years, like the sheer quantity of new brands. I think people are being more intentional as they're bringing to market. So, having, unique positioning. I do also want to note that, and it's actually more normal at Expo than at let's say the Arnold or something, but there weren't really that many like high caffeine or high stim energy drinks. So this is more of a show where the energy drinks that you see are going to be more for that like daily, energy, and not necessarily your like pre-workout energy or your higher stim. Like they're outside of a few of the bigger brands. Like you didn't see too much 200 milligrams of caffeine. You did see Update. Had a booth there. That's the brand using the paraxanthine in there, which is kind of one of the more interesting takes. I'd love to chat about. I truly believe that we're seeing an increased demand for non-caffeine energy, the same way that we're seeing that demand for that buzz without the alcohol on the other end of the day span. But those were some of my big takeaways that people want to get. These are still trending, innovative health focuses. And so brands are still here, but whether it's due to decreased funding, there's not as many new brands that were entering, but there was still a lot. So I'm not trying to say there was only a handful. There was still a lot. It's just it seems like it was a more intentional ad and more of a focus on hydration than energy.
Yeah, it's probably a pretty good distinction, and maybe one that arguably gets overlooked by the casual observer of we say the Expo West is the Super Bowl of CPG, but you have to have kind of natural ingredients. A lot of those products are, of a certain vein, and not to say that isn't, covering a lot of, especially the innovation side or the bleeding edge, or just like the premiumization of CPG and where a lot of that stuff comes from. But if we're looking at it from sometimes energy drinks, a lot of that stuff is still very much artificially sweetened and artificially flavored and things like that, which is not, technically allowed at, an Expo West. Not to say that hydration also doesn't, but I do think that category seems to have I would say a stronger hold of kind of innovation coming in of more that naturally flavored, naturally sweetened side of things. And maybe that was, partially helped along with a major brand like Body Armor that kind of at least kind of conditioned people to think about the category a tiny bit differently over an energy drink where the two, arguably all the major players, they're all still very much, like you said, it's kind of artificially sweetened or sport edge, or either still using a ton of sugar, and maybe that's probably not the best look at an Expo West as well. So obviously I've been to the show I don't know how many times, but I've always kind of looked at it from that side of things because you're going to see some energy players, and I do think we'll probably get into a little bit I do think the natural kind of energy set, or even the alt energy, like you were mentioning, if it's, paraxanthium, or even mushrooms, or if it's teas or matcha, all these types of things. I think all that stuff is starting to catch steam, but it's still probably far behind the traditional energy, where I think hydration, at least it seems like there's a clearer path, I guess, towards like the incumbents if you did want to take that more natural approach.
Absolutely. And like with hydration, there's additional things like one, you can position it towards kids, which actually plays into like a more of a natural channel fit as well. And there's just like there's more opportunities to position it in that natural way. Um, where I think energy drinks, I think that there is that opportunity, but the category has had so many, like, Gatorade obviously owns Hydrate, the sports drink, and then we've seen some others, but like we've seen like there's so many players now who have like market share in energy drinks, and they're all kind of in that, not necessarily in the most natural channel way. And so there's this idea, I think, that like once you go to a certain level of caffeine, let's say, then it becomes like less appealing to a certain type of consumer. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but that seems to be the channel perspective. And so you see like anything that has over 150, it's like a little bit. It starts to move into a different category. So it's just like a different way to view the energy drink set, and there's room for both of them. I think we talked about this on one of our last editions, like the ready to drink tea. There was a lot of ready to drink teas at the show, and some of those can be caffeinated. But really, like the consumer who's used to getting that 200, it's hard for them to pull back down to 100, 120 of caffeine, which is where a lot of the brands are. That being said, there's still an opportunity for those brands because there's a large number of people who are choosing it as a coffee alternative, and not like a pre-workout like high stint. So there's all these segments within the segment, and I think that they all have room to grow, and we're seeing that in the data, which is, I guess, is a great time to go into the data, right, Josh?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's good to kind of let's broaden this out a little bit and look at the two categories on just the overall, data, kind of I think if I remember, and you're gonna straighten me out if I'm wrong, but I think the energy drink set, at least from the tracked channels, I think this year, or I guess last 2023, was just under $21 billion, which is absurdly high. And it continued to grow, I think, at double digits. It's maybe the third or fourth year in a row that's been double digit growth, which again, it's insane. Just the quickness in which energy drinks have kind of like went everywhere. And then hydration, I think last year saw growth, but I think a lot of it came to like pricing. I think a lot of it came down to like they raised prices a lot. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if volume was up as well. But I think you're seeing into this year that strategy, maybe it's the price elasticity of demand. Like people are starting to maybe pull back a little bit in, I guess, the sports drink category because of those high prices are kind of sticking around. Maybe there's other reasons, but I think that's on face value, some things that I saw. Am I wrong in terms of what I'm feeling on that, or is that kind of in line?
No, that's in line. So I pulled the most recent data, and we still have energy drinks are up, 13% in both MULO and the convenience channel. And remember, this is a category that is really dominated by the convenience channel more than anything else. And it's still up double digits in the natural channel for energy drinks alone. Hydration, let me just double check my math here. Hydration's up. The drinks are up, between 5 and 7%, but they're actually down in units right now for the last 52 weeks, whereas energy is still up in units. So that's when, like, just circling back, when we talk about there's room for all these energy drinks, being up in units and dollars for all these years is really an incredible feat for a category, as we've seen so much like price hikes and people pulling back. And this was, on the surface, you think of an energy drink as like a luxury item, but people aren't giving them up. Like this is incorporated in people's daily routines now, the same way that the morning cup of coffee is and was. And so these are categories. And then just to round it out, because I believe that you can't tell the full energy drinks segment story now without pre-workout powders in there as well. and you can't tell the hydration drink without hydration powders in there as well. So I want to say, pre-workouts are up specifically in conventional channel, and while hydration supplements are up, far outpacing what hydration drinks are in every channel. So it's up 60% MULO,
Hmm.
almost triple digits in convenience, and 25% natural. So there's still like a huge, the stick packs for hydration and the hydration supplements. They're still finding big legs, and this is what's driving a lot of the hydration market right now forward. Where people are looking at it as ready to drink is a delivery vehicle for the hydration, the same way the stick packs are. And so one of the things I'm really looking out for this year, and we're already seeing it, is seeing some of these supplement brands moving their hydration supplements into a ready-to-drink format this year. I think we're going to see brands coming into the market the same way we saw the sport active nutrition brands take attributes from pre-workout and build out their ready-to-drink set there.
I'm going to touch on, I think, the powder piece here in a second, but I wanted to kind of think about, maybe why the units, especially on the energy drink side, has been up. I think that you have at least it seems like increased amount of like allowable occasions in which consumers are interested in energy drinks now. Like it used to be what you mentioned, like the swap a lot of times with coffee in the morning. And I think convenience stores have seen that recently around, if it's RTD or even just like the food service, ready to pour type of coffee, like people are swapping out for maybe some of these, performance energy drinks or maybe healthier energy drinks or something like that. There is some of that kind of like stealing a share there that's happening in the largest sales channel. But then you also have, I think, what's happening where like an energy drink seems to be acceptable to maybe have with like your meal at lunch or something like that, which then opens up a completely new amount of like opportunities for everybody. And maybe some of them are better positioned for that, especially if you are distributed by a Coke or a Pepsi, and maybe you're in a lot of those like quick service restaurants, or maybe you're in a lot of those like places where somebody can kind of like grab things quickly. Maybe it's like a hospital or a college or hotels or whatever those things are. I mean, like those are all kind of opportunities that I think are expanded, where energy drinks used to be this like ticks, this is bad, like you don't really do this. Now it's suddenly, it seems like it's an allowable like a thing to kind of consume throughout the day. Obviously not at like this, complete late nights yet. And maybe that's where some of these other things we talked about with Expo West maybe play in a better part of that kind of energy focus side of things. But the hydration side of things, I think you mentioned one that the powder side being that's kind of like people are making swaps and kind of addressing hydration and those kind of needs maybe differently now. They're broadening it up. You see even the biggest players like Gatorade and Body Armor and Electrolyte, and I'm sure Powerade probably also like they all have powdered versions, but even all of the,
and
I
Triad
guess
came out with theirs, and they're doing well with it as also.
Yeah, all those. And then I also think there's another, before we kind of maybe dive a little bit further into the powder thing, you also think about hydration. Like there are the maybe sometimes non-functional like elements. Like I think like liquid death. Like liquid death could serve the purpose for maybe some of these like not sport application kind of hydration needs, but maybe just like casual everyday hydration needs. Like maybe you pick up a liquid death instead, and they have obviously continued their high growth rates, or even maybe on a more natural like plant perspective, like a coconut water, like a Vita Coco. I think they're continuing to grow extremely well, and that like coconut water category is not necessarily grouped into this. So like they do, I think, have some play into maybe why hydration isn't performing maybe as well. I don't know. Those are just kind of some takes there, and I'll give you a chance to maybe if you had any things to add to that before we jump into maybe more a powder conversation.
You're absolutely right. The idea of like hydration throughout the day is real, and it's big, and people are getting it in a bunch of different ways. And so we can tie it all together. Like a lot of the energy drinks are nightlife focused. Like that's where they do a lot of their business. And now, like, Liquid Death is a perfect example, and there's other brands as well. that like it's okay to have one of those in your hands, like at like a nighttime scene or like in a social gathering. So this hydration during each part of the day is really big. And you hit it on the head. Like when I'm feeling a little dehydrated, I usually pick up one of those liters of coconut water. Like that's usually my go-to. And one of the things that it doesn't fit perfectly in this conversation, but I think it works, is one of the things that I think is an um, untapped right now is the idea of products that are inherently functional and really playing those up. And so we know that coconut water, for example, is a hydration drink. But there's a lot of juices out there that have inherent functionality that, like, paired with a functional ingredient, I think could do really well. And so understanding, like, the energy or the hydration aspect of it, we'll stick to those right now. But having some of these products that are inherently functional play a big role. And just getting people to drink more, whatever, if they're drinking more liquid outside of alcohol, it's probably helping them with the hydration. So there is this both this group that falls outside what we categorize as sports and hydration beverages, that are definitely playing a role, and that comes from the powdered supplements, as well as what you're mentioning. Things like bottled water obviously is not classified as a sports drink, but people often use it for hydration, or canned water in this case. So those are things that we should be looking at. And coconut water, I think, is still one. It had its moment a while back, but you hit it on the head. It's still growing in a lot of pockets.
Yeah, I want to dive a little bit more into the powders, because I think it's interesting that you see both original beverages that have now kind of created powdered, extensions. And then you have where we've talked a lot about is like these powdered supplement sports nutrition brands that had a huge audience, had a huge amount of kind of momentum, that have decided, let's take that, let's take that audience, let's take that community, and let's build the beverage RTD side of things. And it's interesting that it's happening on both energy and hydration. Like, you had the OG Gatorade, again, like they have been doing powdered stuff for the longest time, a lot with like team sports. And, I'm sure all of us have mixed up Gatorade powder over the years and things like that. But like even, Prime, has a powdered extension. I think I mentioned some of the earlier ones, but I found a very interesting one recently was like Liquid Death decided to do a hydration stick. And I don't think they hit it. They didn't do very well with it. I think they are taking some feedback from the market and maybe going to iterate that idea. But I thought even that extension from an outside of the sports beverage space, moving into a powdered extension into there, like that's interesting. And maybe that's also something that could happen with the energy side as well. But like the energy one, I think there's all kinds of things going on there. Like there's like even like you think about Alani Nu, like Alani Nu started out as like a supplement, pre-workout. Then they do an energy drink, and then they do a energy stick. It's like they are like coming at this like complete system of like, how many times can I hit you with energy? And it seems like everything is working. So it's kind of like I've been mentioning it recently. It seems like it's a kind of like a beverage identity crisis. Like everybody's trying to figure out like, what are we, like, what's a beverage, what's not a beverage? Like, is ready to mix a beverage? Is RTD only considered a beverage? Like, it seems like consumers have spoken and they're just like, we have a need state that we're trying to solve, and we don't care what the maybe form factor is, as long as we get what we need out of this, and it's fun and it's exciting and it kind of fits into what we're seeking, and emotional attachments, whatever that is.
Yeah, the consumers want the health focused South for, and so at different points in the day, I mean, just look at, you and I are consumers, right? I use each one of those. So I use powdered products for hydration and energy. I use ready to drinks, and rarely will I buy the stick packs, but I do occasionally use them. And so, consumers, they want the health concern solved for. And so what brands are realizing is like sometimes our ready to drink isn't the most convenient option for them. So let's build an option for people who like our brand but who are on the go more. They want to throw the stick packs in their bag, and so. But you're also seeing like they're taking the attributes that are most impactful for some of these categories and bringing it over to a more established category. Like you and I both love pre-workouts, but the category is dwarfed by energy drinks. And so some of these brands who made their name for themselves in powdered pre-workouts, by taking those attributes into energy drinks, they were able to really explode their footprint in CPG. And so you're seeing similar things happening all across the store, but hydration, like it's just right for it because it's the same playbook. And so, we saw a lot. We've seen a lot of brands come out with a ready-to-drink version of it. I expect a lot more from the big names, and I have no like inside information about this like coming up, but like I really anticipate that that's what we're going to see this year.
Yeah, I think really on the hydration space, because I think you alleviated to this earlier, but like Ghost made the jump, I think, from originally a powder into the beverage. I think that there's probably a dozen or so sports nutrition or like active nutrition brands that have a decent kind of stronghold within the powdered hydration set that could easily jump into a beverage whenever they decide. Even like I think about these like mega players that it would make sense, maybe not because from a strategic standpoint, maybe they aren't set up for this or not, but like even like a liquid IV, like obviously they crush it in powders. I think originally maybe they were, if I remember correctly, maybe they did have a beverage like when they first started before anybody knew who they were, and they realized what didn't work for them. But like even like an Element like that is crushing it right now as well. Like I could see them becoming big players in hydration if they really had everything else dialed in and everything going on there. Like I could see a path for a lot of these to become the next, $100 million, $250 million retail sale brands in hydration and make a significant dent in the space. Again, they're not doing, $5 or so billion like Gatorade, but like they are starting to chip away at it. Similar to what we saw a handful of years ago with energy. Now those energy players that are like, if it's Ghost or it's C4 or it's Alani or wherever, like they're $500 million retail sales with a straight line to $1 billion. Like there's no doubt, I don't think, that any of those brands could hit $1 billion in retail sales over the next handful of years. So then it's one of those things where like hydration's probably a couple of years behind, which then could be pretty interesting to see like when do they start to stack up these competitors that could wreak havoc against these like big 2 or big 3 incumbents.
And the only thing I would contend with what you said, because I agree with everything, is that it might not even be wreaking havoc, because I think a lot of it's additive. I think a lot of people are it's bringing new people into the category who either were never in there to begin with or who are coming back to the category because the brands that they're focused on different areas of their health. Because like what we're seeing in the energy, for example, like we always go back to this as the playbook, the top couple brands, they're not losing out when all these other brands are coming in and doing really well. They're still growing and in most channels at least doing very well. And so I think like it's just that this whole mentality shift for consumers into health span is really the general term for it, is bringing people into this category more so than like trading out of brands. And there's one other thing. Oh, you know what I think, and I don't often make product recommendations here, but do you remember you spoke about Liquid IV having a ready to drink? I don't recall if they did at the beginning, although how much would that change up the market if they launched one now? But do you remember, and I hope they don't still have this product, but do you remember the Extend ready to drink? Do they still have that out there?
I don't think they did try it for a little bit, but they maybe, again, and this is maybe me not knowing, but I don't think it's in market anymore. And if it is, like, again,
Think about we're sorry. Like, it was ahead of its time. I think like maybe the time is now. But like a brand like that, like really, and obviously the same parent company as C4. But C4 is is doing great with energy drinks now. So something like the Extend, which may have been ahead of its time for the ready to drink, where people weren't really into those hydration. I think they were still just positioned as an intra workout beverage at the time. But now I think the market's ready for products like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think like amino acids and just like BCAAs and all of that. It's an interesting kind of like element that could be both in hydration and in energy. Like you see, I think in like Sweden or like um, in the Nordic region, I think you have like Nocco that's
Yeah,
owned by
exactly.
Vitamin Well, and then you have I think even like the Celsius drinks for a while, maybe even had them, but like even in the U.S., they Nocco kind of has launched. I think you had the Amino Energy from Optimum. You had like we're talking about on the hydration side, Extend and things like that. As of somebody as a purist, I guess in the supplement sports nutrition space, like I obviously love the idea of having amino acids or BCAAs or some element within that. But the mainstream public, I think they still are a few years behind, like ever getting a handle on like what that is, or maybe it never breaks through or not. I mean, I don't know, but it is interesting, like, because there's on both sides, it plays into both sides, and maybe it plays into the, some of the stuff. And I don't want to get us too off track, but like, if you think about the GLP-1, like, muscle loss type of a situation, or, even like longevity and like needing to have, if it's muscle strength or like there's elements that like this could play into like some much bigger kind of trends. Like maybe they attach themselves and rightfully explain the value to a certain customer base that like shuttles it into the mainstream. I don't know, because it could be an interesting idea.
Yeah, and to that point, there's a brand that I really like on that I don't know if they just read the labeling, but Super Nirvana, they have their hydration
Mm.
drink out there with HMB in it. And HMB obviously is great for muscle preservation, people who are on GLP-1 drugs. And so I'm glad you said that, because that sparked like when we talk about the hydration and energy set. Hydration set, it was like hydration plus. So like what else can we add to just like an electrolyte beverage? And then for energy, I also want to note that we saw like a lot more like caffeinated things in other categories. So we talked about tea, but there's also like this functional soda that's gotten like a big boost, mainly for digestive health. There were a handful of sodas, one pop I tried that was really good. It have 100 milligrams of caffeine in there, and so that, especially when we talk about like the non-performance energy drink set, like we're seeing these attributes taken to these other categories as well. So like thinking about what categories are taking attributes or what attributes from other categories are coming in is really like an interesting way to look at what's coming.
In that vein, I'm starting to think about something, and maybe this is because I just talked to the guys that do Be Amazing. They just came out with this shelf stable greens drink, and how I'm going to transition to this is because I think, and I just was recently kind of shocked again about this, and I think it was a few years ago when I was first shocked about it. But a brand that is in the energy set that I would argue, if you asked anybody like to name the top, say 20 brands, they probably would never name this brand or this product. And it's the V8 and energy SKUs. Like it's the you talk about such an outlier of all this is that, like, talk about fruit juice and real vegetable juice, and then an energy component in there is like this weird enigma that like has lived on its own, and nobody seems to have like realized that it has, like, for whatever, it has a ton of consumer appeal for one reason or another, and like you don't see anybody like taking a shot towards that, because obviously that's a legacy brand and maybe somebody can kind of take a unique approach to that. But like I saw that again the other day and I was like, why do I keep like being surprised by this? Like,
It is surprising, and I just feel like it must be a different type of consumer. Like I don't think people are like bouncing between Red Bull and
yeah,
V8 or Celsius and V8. So it leaves there to be more opportunity for yet another. So how much caffeine is in that, by the way?
I don't
You know,
remember, but it's not that much.
it's
Maybe
like
it's like close to a
60,
Red Bull, I think.
60, 80, something like that. But yeah, they're interesting, and you do see like a lot of brands, doing better than you probably would have expected. Not that I expect, V8's a big brand. Not that I'm surprised that they're doing well, but it is an interesting category. And juice as a sweetener is something else that's catching on, where people are not to get too off track, but like juice as a sweetener for a lot of these products, where people want less added sugar, less artificial sweeteners, less even natural low calorie sweeteners. So if you can add it to a product that's already, it's got its sugar content from the juice, um, that's an interesting way to sweeten things.
So let's talk a little bit, maybe things that you've noticed, or maybe we can just, have some different thoughts and notions towards, like, I want to think below the big two in these two categories. And maybe we can just talk about some different things you're watching, some things that maybe I'm paying attention to. And I'll take the lead and maybe think about this from maybe a little bit of a brand perspective at first. And I think I mentioned a few of these things before, but like, C4 and Ghost seem to be the next, billion-dollar brands. They seem to have a pretty good trek. I think Alani, with the refocus of Congo brands, maybe with Prime kind of settling in at a certain level, maybe they start to focus a lot more again on the Alani side of things. Also, we mentioned before I think I made the comment, and you probably as well, is like I don't want to say the second wave, but like these sports nutrition kind of incubated brands that are, especially in energy, are next up. So you have, First Form, I think has made a lot of traction recently. Rise, I think, is an obvious one to talk about. Redcon One, ever since they hired the ex-Bang executive, I think has done a really good job. Amino Lean, I've seen a ton recently from RSP Nutrition, and maybe that has a little bit of effect of like their influencer strategy. They've done a really good job there. But like, that's a lot of the stuff that I think, at least on the energy side, that I think I've been paying attention to, that maybe is a little bit under the radar. If, again, people aren't as like in tune with stuff as we are, that like we are just like in the weeds 24/7 on. Like, these are storylines that I think are going to start to play out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think those brands, Gorilla Mind is another one that I've been interested in, and they're kind of competing in that performance energy space. Not just Gorilla, but all of them. And so those are brands that I think are going to keep coming up as long as like the category keeps coming up, which I think the growth might start to, I've been all rah-rah on energy drinks. I do think the growth might start to slow this year. Just, I think for such a large category, it's really hard to keep expecting double-digit growth. But these brands, I think that they have a pathway to be gigantic. The main thing I'm looking out for, and I think I mentioned this, is I think that there's this demand for lower to no caffeine, but still have that like stim feeling. And so I'm really looking for where's that going to come from. And so there's been like stim-free pre-workouts forever, but they're usually just like pump products. But like as far as an energy drink, like, is it going to be? I don't think it's going to just be like adding adaptogens and mushrooms, because people don't typically feel that, even though they'll probably get some energy from it. So I'm really looking for like what can be in there, and that this obviously goes to like what's mixability plus what works. And so what are some of the ingredients that you're interested in from that perspective, like not caffeine, but like an actual energy boosting product?
Yeah, I mean, I think you move into like, if it's nootropics or like brain, type of energy ingredients. I think that, the one that always comes off the top of my head is Cognizant, just because, I've known and loved that ingredient for a long period of time.
That's
but even
usually paired with caffeine, though, right?
Yeah, you have it paired with some caffeine, but I also think there's some different ways to kind of throw that in there. I found it interesting that I think recently I saw it into a multivitamin, and that was mostly because I think there was a recent study, this is getting us off track, about multivitamins with kind of brain, if it was focus or brain energy or concentration. Like, there was a study that kind of said if you take your multivitamins, so it was like an interesting way to, maybe look at it and kind of be able to approach that. I also think, if it's a certain forms of magnesium, or like, like you said before, if it's herbal ingredients, adaptogen ingredients, like I think some of those things can start to make a good sense, because there is I think we maybe have made this mention a few different times in different pieces of content, but there's like, when you get home, or even like before you get home, there's this period of time which a lot of people are still needing to be locked in, maybe not from a caffeine stimulation standpoint. Both of us being parents, like we obviously can't just like turn our computers off and stop, or, some people have side hustles, or, second jobs, or things like that. And maybe it's not right to keep slamming coffee or keep slamming energy drinks. So then there is that opportunity, I think, to be a focus, kind of mood, like in a relaxed way, in a more of a, I don't know. It's interesting. I know I just talked to, Ben Witt from Recess. I think they're doing a really great job at kind of carving out that space. I know there's other ones that are trying to also carve out that space, maybe even from like, the functional non-alcoholic beers and cocktails and mocktail, all that kind of stuff. Like it all seems to be like converging together in this kind of way. But I do think like there's probably a pretty decent opportunity for that, like after work, before bedroom or bedtime kind of phase.
Yeah, and those, by the way, I'm working on a content piece around this exact thing, kind of those end of day alternatives for the people who aren't drinking alcohol. And so this is a category I think has the potential to be a massive category. Right now we're seeing a lot of innovation into it, but not so much like a mega category yet. Not at all a mega category, but like I think there's a big opportunity there. And yeah, I'm just like I imagine like the same segment of people that's pulling back on alcohol, I think they're going to start to pull back on caffeine next. And so I just think that there's this big need for alternatives. Whereas, and believe me, if you guys have listened to the last, what have we been talking for, 30, 40 minutes, and the other ones, I'm not saying caffeine's going to go away, the same way we're not saying alcohol is going away. There's, like, I'm actually quite bullish on the alternative. But I do think that there's a segment of people, a growing segment of people, especially people like Gen Z, and then people as they're aging out, they don't want as much caffeine. I think there's going to be this group of people that's going to be pulling back on alcohol and caffeine. And so if we don't want them to move out of these categories, there has to be an alternative that works. And when I say works, right, it's like they want to feel it. And so those are some things that I'm interested in. I myself, I've been interested in infinity lately. So I think I'm trying to go a month with no caffeine and just use like some of those products that have that. So I'll let you know how that goes. So far so good. It's been about 2 weeks. I've gotten some good workouts in. But I really think that more attention should be paid to that area right now. It is being paid, and rightfully so, to this like non-alcoholic segment and what's going to replace that. I think if we're looking forward, the same should be said to this caffeine alternative.
Yeah, I think I'm right with you. I think this plays out over the next 5 to 7 years. I think if anybody wants to look back on this piece of content, I feel like we're going to be right. I feel like that's one of those like, just early stages of a secular trend that we're going to be like, oh, obviously that was something we should have all noticed, and wherever, where Scott and I are at least saying, pay attention. Right now, maybe it's not supported by billion-dollar brands, but it's eventually going to be. We, hopefully have spotted it a little bit earlier than some other people. But maybe this is a good segue into talking about the trend that I've noticed, because you mentioned, kind of people trying to replace out alcohol. And again, I don't think people will completely stop drinking. Like, just like, I think I made this point recently on a piece of content, like you think about vegans or vegetarians, like that's a restrictive, like you just cut out all animal products. In the same way, I don't think the vast majority of people pick sobriety in just all of their senses. They just are going to be more intentional or mindful on what they do. And that for big alcohol, portfolios, if we're talking AB InBev, or we talk Molson Coors, we talk Constellation brands, or we talk Mark Anthony brand, like all these types of portfolios, they have this both immediate concern of like, the consumption of their products seem to be both on premise, off premise, not doing all that great. And then they also have to contend with like this long-term like shift that's just staring them in the face and saying like people arguably are going to make maybe 1% less decisions on drinking each year. And that makes huge differences when we're talking about $100 billion plus categories and things like that. So I'm noticing that both of its energy drinks and hydration, and this is mostly because they are like in a great space within this like CPG world. You have, generally higher margins, you have, high, kind of consumption rates on those types of things. You also have usually brands that have great communities and like people that really love them as brands over just like a product. You're seeing these companies start to either, take bits and pieces of these businesses. I think, AB InBev owns a piece of Ghost Energy. Molson owns a piece of Zoa. But another recent one that I just saw was like Mark Anthony Brands was like developing their own. They didn't buy one. They're going to develop their own hydration drink with the soccer star Lionel Messi. Like, so it seems like the total beverage play, like they're starting to realize we have to hedge our bets. We have to start to think about this as like total liquid. And I think you made the comment before, like just share a stomach or whatever. Like, how do I keep as much of that liquid going to my portfolio over somebody else's portfolio?
Yeah, it's so funny you bring that one up. I have a great analyst on my team, Yvonne, who brought that story up to me before you did yesterday. And she was like, this is going to be a really big deal. And I think it definitely can be. They have the distribution, like you mentioned, they have the efficiencies. And when you get like, I think he's like number 3 for followers on Instagram, period. Like, yeah. So like something crazy like that. And so when you have that kind of firepower, like it's going to make some noise. Obviously, how the product is and the operations are going to depend on the longevity of it, but it's definitely going to make a splash. And we saw that. It's interesting because like you mentioned, like it's like an alcohol brand getting into like the non-alcoholic. They used to kind of be separated, like for beverage. And now, again, they're building their portfolios. And it reminds me a little bit, we saw a lot of big non-alcoholic brands make like a hard or spiked version of their products in the past. And so I haven't checked on the data on those in a while, some of those collaborations, but it'll be interesting to see like how big some of those got, if we can take anything away for how big it is going the other way. And I think it's a little different when you're like buying a share of an established brand versus like this one where it's creating a new one. And so it's definitely something that people should look out for because, this is like next level celebrity endorsement, obviously.
Before I let you go, because I think, maybe that messy comment is maybe important to kind of let's leave people with more than just the beverage trends and some different things. Let's talk about like what's feeding some of this, like especially when we're talking about the speed in which something comes from an idea to scale, which you're seeing more and more outliers of this happen. And it's not because it's there's things going on, and I think that there's a number, at least kind of from my perspective. I think that one, we have to think about generational shift. I think you mentioned like Gen Z being so influenced by social media. And then you have social media then moving into commerce, being better at connecting things of like, this social commerce or shopatainment, like TikTok shop or whatever. That reduces a bunch of friction. And not to say that that's the best for beverages a lot of times because you're still shipping things e-commerce wise, and that's not good. But I do think that feeds up into the idea that like, you at least can create national awareness very cheaply. You can create national distribution very cheaply, even if that's Amazon or if it's, social commerce arm. And then you play that into like a lot of like the just consumer behavior trends or whatever. And you see the disruption and you see the quickness in which things can kind of build much faster. Like everything seems to be speeding up quicker. But within our space, like you have to kind of pay attention sometimes to some of those driving forces because that does then change the models sometimes, especially on my side when I'm saying how quick do you need to scale, or how quick should this thing, or what are the feedback loops that allow you to understand if this thing's a winner or not. Like some of those things have to be read much quicker than they used to be. And I think it comes down to like some of that stuff that I just mentioned. I'm sure you guys track some similar things, or some other things that you guys kind of have put together in a model that maybe makes sense. But like that's just kind of some stuff that I see on my side.
Yeah, and there's always those. I would say like those are rocket ships, and they're everyone wants to be a rocket ship. I do want to really emphasize though that there still are a lot of so those are rocket ships. There's still a lot of Camrys out there who are chugging along, key account by key account, growing that way, and having a lot of steady growth. What we do at Spins, a lot of times we help you find like the right partners, because a lot of times if you just take like you go into a big mass or conventional retailer right away, it might not be the best fit, and it might lead to you not being around rather than being like that rocket ship. And so while it's true that like routine integration is happening faster because of all those things that you said, so like brands, the possibility to like just kind of shoot up to be a 5, 6, 700 million dollar band like within a couple of years is there. It's still for most brands, the tried and true strategy of like kind of key account by key account, finding the right distributor partners, finding the right retail partners is still the way that most of the growing brands are doing it. And so it's like a yes, but and yes, so to speak. So that would be like if you're a small brand out there, you know, getting on social, going viral, all those, getting a big celebrity, like those are great. Those are obviously like good PR pushes, but really focusing on your channel strategy, finding the right partners, and connecting with your consumer base. It's better to be deep with your consumer base than shallow with a much larger base. That's, obvious advice, but feel like it needs to be said anyways. So it really like there's room for both is kind of what we're saying. But you are completely correct in saying like that ability to scale at speeds that we haven't seen is there, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you on all that. I think staying disciplined, even within growing categories like hydration and energy, are important. Strategic management a lot of times comes down to like understanding cadence and understanding sequences and understanding how to put those puzzles together. And a lot of times those things, especially in CPG, need to be slow and steady at the first part, because
Yep.
I think the direction is more important sometimes than the speed, at least initially. So take your time and kind of focus on that. So I totally agree with what Scott's kind of mentioning there, even though, you and I maybe think that's basic, stuff, table stakes. I do think you see it across the board. CPG entrepreneurs make those mistakes way too often. And it's something that like probably buries a lot of brands. But Scott, I know we've been talking for a while. We always end up talking for a while. And whoever watches this, we apologize for being a little bit lengthy in our our ways in which we describe things, but hopefully you got a bunch of value here. And I just want to thank you for your time, Scott. I know tomorrow, I think your son turns 2. Is that what's going? So,
That
happy early birthday to that. Hopefully
thank
you
you
have
very
a
much.
good time, and excited to come back and talk again in the next quarter.
Yeah, let's do it again. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, considering that like button to support me. Also help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that I think just over 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.